The action of the movie, based on real events, begins with archival footage from the time of World War II. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, America enters into conflict with Japan in the Pacific Theater of Operations. On January 16, 1942, a Douglas Devastator torpedo bomber flies into the sunset on a combat mission. However, the radio operator, John Aldrich, is unable to contact the aircraft carrier from which they took off. Aldrich reports this to Captain Harold Dixon, but he doesn't respond. The bombardier Tony Pasciulla has to intervene to reach the pilot. Dixon surveys the landscape under the wings, trying to determine their location. Realizing they are lost, Dixon decides to return to the aircraft carrier, but this proves difficult as he doesn't know their exact position. The radio can't reach the ship. After intercepting Japanese communications, Aldrich turns off the radio to avoid detection. Dixon orders Tony to release the torpedo to lighten the aircraft's weight and gain altitude to extend their flight range. After realizing they don't have enough fuel to reach friendly ships, Dixon instructs Aldrich to broadcast their coordinates, disregarding the safety measures. Then he orders the crew to prepare for a water landing, which includes wearing life jackets and placing essential supplies into waterproof bags, including a parachute. Dixon carefully pilots the plane towards the ocean surface. When the aircraft hits the water, Tony breaks his nose and water begins to flood the cabin. Opening the cockpit, the pilot climbs onto the wing of the sinking plane, preparing to inflate the life raft. The subordinates want to follow with their prepared bags, but their seatbelts are stuck. As the bomber sinks, Tony and Aldrich manage to unfasten their seatbelts and escape. They surface, forgetting the supplies in the confusion. On the surface, Dixon tries to inflate the raft. He orders his crew to ditch their personal weapons as they are dragging them down. The radio operator removes his holster, but Tony struggles. When Dixon activates the raft, it flips over, covering both Tony and Aldrich. After resurfacing, they admit to Dixon that they can't swim well. To right the raft, Dixon instructs them to hold onto the rope handles and remove their life jackets. He ties the jackets to the other side of the raft to create a pulley system to turn it over. After getting onto the small inflatable raft, the airmen settle in and fall asleep, waiting to be rescued by morning. At dawn on the first day, the crew, who barely knew each other, introduce themselves. Aldrich and Tony pretend to share an imaginary cup of coffee. Dixon informs them that they are about 20 to 40 miles from the ship, so they should be found soon. To avoid missing the search team, Dixon orders a 360-degree lookout. The airmen spot a plane in the distance and spread a parachute on the water to attract attention. However, they realize they left all their supplies on the plane when they escaped the stuck belts. They have no flares either. Stripping off their clothes and life jackets, they wave to the plane, but it flies away. Dixon is the first to realize they've missed their chance at rescue, but Tony waves his life jacket until the end. Dixon, frustrated, says it was their only chance. Now the search will shift to another direction. He scolds his crew for losing their gear, but they argue they were drowning along with the plane. Dixon reminds them that even in the raft, he is the highest-ranking officer. He then conducts an inventory of their remaining items: rope, wire, a whistle, a pocket knife, and a mirror that could have been used to signal the plane earlier. But they have no food, no water, and no paddles. After the inventory, Dixon orders them to remove their boots to avoid damaging the inflatable raft. However, he keeps his own shoes on board, reasoning that someone will need to walk if they reach land. Tony admits he kept his pistol, as he couldn't unfasten his holster in time. While cleaning the gun, Tony talks to Aldrich. Dixon, drifting off, has a nightmare about the flight that led to this situation. Waking up, he realizes nothing has changed. The raft still drifts in the endless ocean against the backdrop of a boundless sunset. When night falls, he orders constant lookout shifts. Waking up in the middle of the night, Dixon offers Aldrich something to drink, though the only available drink is their own urine, served in a surviving boot. In the morning, Dixon estimates they are about 3,000 kilometers from Hawaii and half that distance from Samoa. Using a string from his shirt, he calculates the wind's direction and speed, which are pushing the raft towards Hawaii. Sooner or later, they will reach it. The main task is to stay alive. To tackle the food shortage, the airmen craft a fishing rod. Tony disassembles a spare pistol magazine to create a hook from the spring, tying it to the rope and attaching a piece of cloth from a handkerchief. The bombardier gives the rod to the radio operator after tying pliers as a weight. Aldrich casts the line. and immediately there is a bite, but a huge fish breaks the line, leaving only the weight. The first failure doesn't deter the drifting fisherman. Aldrich casts the line again and patiently waits, but nothing happens. Tired of waiting, he attaches his life jacket and dives into the water to investigate what's going on. However, discussions about the presence of sharks force him back into the raft. They end the second day with talks of food. The next day, while Aldrich fishes, Tony talks about how he was a poor student in school. Dixon, overhearing the conversation, wonders if the bombardier's lack of knowledge might have caused them to go off course during the flight. Another day passes. Driven by thirst, Tony contemplates drinking the salty sea water, but the others dissuade him. Suddenly, Dixon finds a pencil in his pocket, which allows him to draw a map of the area from memory. Using navigational instruments and their last known data, he charts a course towards the nearest archipelago, hoping the wind will carry them in the right direction. Dixon fashions a sea sail using a wire frame and a life jacket. He ties it to a rope and lowers the construction into the water, where the current pushes the raft, speeding them along as long as the favorable wind lasts. Exhausted from thirst, the airmen decide to pray, asking God to send rain. Their prayer isn't immediately answered, so Tony suggests singing a song. After lifting their spirits with song, the airmen sink back into despair. At night, Tony dreams of drowning. When he wakes, it's raining. Stranded on the raft, they manage to quench their thirst by soaking up the rainwater with their clothes, squeezing it out, and storing it in waterproof bags. However, the hunger problem remains. Despite the presence of fish near the fishing line, they still haven't caught anything. Aldrich decides to try an old method. Ignoring Dixon's warning about the risk of damaging the raft, Aldrich pulls out his knife and leans over the water. He stabs at a fish drawn to the smaller bait. A massive creature leaps onto the raft, straight into Tony's lap. The men struggle to keep hold of it while Aldrich stabs at it. It turns out to be a large shark. Gutting the shark, they find smaller fish inside. Their catch is packed with food. After a meal of smaller fish and dividing up the shark, they store some for the future and use some as bait. They also clean the raft of blood by wiping it off with their clothes and wringing them out overboard. During the process, Tony tells Aldrich about his sister, Frances. Their light-hearted conversation is interrupted by an unsettling sight. The shark blood they've dumped overboard has attracted a whole group of other sharks. That night, Aldrich wakes up and washes himself when he is suddenly bitten on the arm. Tony, startled by the screams, instinctively shoots into the water, trying to drive the predators away. Despite the circumstances, the airmen don't lose hope. They ration the remaining rainwater carefully, continue to sail with their makeshift sea sail, and huddle together on the tiny raft, gazing at another sunset. Occasionally, they pray. Tony meticulously cleans his personal weapon, and Aldrich tries the knife fishing trick again. The 15th day dawns. An exhausted Tony stares at his pistol, wondering if it would be easier to end their suffering quickly. Aldrich asks for the gun, not to save Tony, but to shoot an albatross that has landed on the raft. The shot is accurate, and Dixon immediately dives into the water to retrieve the bird. But as Dixon swims back with their prize, a shark's fin appears. The shark moves quickly toward the pilot, and the gun jams. His crewmates paddle toward him, just in time to pull him back onto the raft. Displeased, the shark swims directly underneath the raft. As the others eat the bird, Tony sits with his legs dangling over the edge, contemplating the 3 remaining bullets, one for each of them. He throws the bullets into the water to avoid the temptation. On the 20th day, Dixon wakes to find that no one is keeping watch. He rouses his subordinates, but they argue. The situation is not conducive to maintaining discipline. Tensions rise. During the argument, Aldrich asks how Dixon charted their course. Even though Dixon remembers the map exactly, he didn't know their starting point since they got lost during the flight. It turns out that, by Dixon's calculations, they should have reached the islands 3 or 4 days ago. Dixon then confesses that they got lost because of him. Due to the heat in the cockpit, he had dozed off for a few minutes during the flight and missed a crucial navigational point. However, even now, he refuses to give up, though the wind has died again. The pilot decides to take matters into his own hands. Using Aldrich's knife, he cuts the soles off his shoes, which they use as paddles, tying them to their hands with shoelaces so they don't lose them. Along the way, they agree that whoever spots land first gets treated to dinner by the others. Another day passes with Dixon and Aldrich paddling with their shoe soles. Tony, lying exhausted, tells them more about his sister, who increasingly occupies the radio operator's thoughts. By evening, when all three are lying unconscious, waves rise and the sky fills with clouds. They are rejuvenated, hopeful that they can replenish their water supply, and eagerly spread out their clothes. But the storm doesn't stop there. By nightfall, lightning flashes across the sky. Dixon warns that if they face a hurricane, they will have to quickly bail water out of the raft. But even this isn't their biggest problem. Huge waves soon crash down on them. Dixon hands his life jacket to Aldrich, who is the worst swimmer. The next wave washes Dixon overboard, but he quickly returns to the raft. Then, a truly massive wave strikes. The raft flips, scattering the unfortunate airmen and all their supplies. Dixon and Aldrich resurface under the overturned raft, but Tony is nowhere to be seen. They move to the outer edge, trying to find their companion. Tony eventually swims to them, and together, on Dixon's command, they flip the raft over and climb aboard to wait out the storm. The next morning is calm and cloudless. The three men lie on the raft, completely exhausted, and joke about eating the first one to die. However, without their knife, it would be difficult. Dixon admits that he can no longer remember his wife's face. Aldrich begins to hallucinate, seeing visions of Tony's sister. Gathering their remaining strength, they paddle with their hands, steering the raft forward, but their energy doesn't last long. Dixon notices Tony lying motionless with his eyes open, unresponsive. He calls out to report the sad news, but Tony suddenly stirs and admits he can hear music. He started having auditory hallucinations. Dixon confesses that he, too, has seen visions of a fleet, twice. Aldrich lifts his head and says he can see land. The others turn and also see palm trees in the distance. This means they owe the radio operator a dinner. Not believing their luck, the weeping men summon their remaining strength and paddle towards the island. As they get closer, the waves grow stronger, throwing them off the raft. But nothing stops the airmen from crawling onto the sandy beach. They spot some huts nearby and, after one last glance at the raft, which had been their home for the past month, they head towards the shelter. A brief historical note reveals that they had spent 34 days in the ocean, drifting over 1,600 kilometers before finally reaching Puka Puka Island on February 20th. Dixon was awarded a medal for saving the crew but never flew again. Due to his injuries, Tony was forced to leave the Navy. After his death, his ashes were scattered at sea. Aldrich married Tony's sister after the war. The film ends with a photograph of the real men, taken after their rescue. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.